Black and Grey. Pakistan's actions against terrorists keep up appearances, but do not inspire confidence. The timing of Pakistan's arrest of Zakir Rahman Lakhvi, the LET operations commander, and linked to the 2008 Mumbai attacks, just ahead of the next meet of global watchdog, the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, has been greeted with skepticism in India. Whenever Pakistan has faced a decision on its grey list status, it has carried out similar actions that appear to be aimed more at ensuring a better outcome for itself at the FATF. Its arrest and conviction of Hez Saeed and other LET leaders in terror-financing cases, the passing of anti-terrorism and money laundering laws in the Pakistan Assembly to bring them in line with FATF-mandated international norms, and the publication of new lists of terrorists at various times, all timed before FATF reviews of Pakistan's status, have been cited as more of the same. The FATF's Asia-Pacific Joint Group is to meet in January to prepare recommendations for final decision on Pakistan's status to be presented to the FATF plenary session in February. Pakistan was brought back onto the grey list in June 2018, and given a 7-point action plan list to be completed by October 2019. Since then, it received at least 4 reprieves, and was judged at last count to have completed 21 of 27 points, with sign outstanding. The plenary session can choose one of 3 options therefore, in keeping Pakistan on the grey list, where it is subject to some financial restrictions, to downgrade it to the black list, where it will face stringent sanctions, or close the review and let Pakistan owe the lists altogether. Pakistan will now hope that its progress in the action plan and having key terrorists in prison earn it a reprieve. The fear for India is that if Pakistan earns that reprieve, it can reverse all its actions. India has watched the arrests of all these men and other terrorists on India's most wanted lists in the past, only to envy that they are released on bail, or let go over prosecutorial lapses once the world's gaze is averted. Last month, a Pakistan court's decision to overturn the conviction of al-Qaeda leader Ahmed Omar Sheikh Zayed, a terrorist India was forced to release during the 1999 IC-814 hijacking, for the 2002 murder of American journalist Daniel Pearl, shows how Pakistan's investigating agencies and judicial system treat terrorism. Hez Saeed has been convicted only of terror-financing charges and faces concurrent sentencing of about 6 years at the most, as would Lakhvi, who faces similar charges, despite a long record in transnational terror attacks. Others like Masood Azhar continue to evade any kind of prosecution despite UN sanctions. For India and its battle to have Pakistan's establishment held accountable on this issue, the FATF grey listing, from 2012-2015 and 2018 NOW, is a necessary lever to keep that process going. An ode to recognizing the value of housework. This is an agenda all political parties, and not just the Makal-Niti Mayam, could incorporate in their manifestos. In the context of the forthcoming state assembly election in Tamil Nadu, the Makal-Niti Mayam, MNM, led by veteran actor Kamal Hassan, has made an eye-catching election promise that is evidently targeted at a large constituency of voters, women who are full-time homemakers. The party has promised to recognize housework as a salaried profession by paying homemakers hitherto unrecognized and unmonetized for their work at home. A recent political entrant in the electoral fray, the MNM's promise to directly pay women a monthly amount may be viewed as a strategy to grab attention in an overcrowded, highly competitive electoral landscape. Nonetheless, the promise bears close examination as it adds an important issue and one that has had an interesting, if checkered significance in the history of women's movements. Origins of the demand for wages for housework arose in the context of struggle and consciousness raising associated with the second wave of the women's movement in North America and Europe. Alongside other demands for social and political equality, women's rights campaigners made visible and also politicized women's everyday experience of housework and childcare in the private realm of the household. In doing this, they challenged the assumption that a natural affinity for housework was rooted in the essential nature of women who were performing a labor of love. For leading women's rights activists of the 1960s and 1970s, it was important to bust the myth that women's work at home was a personal service with no links to capitalist production. In a concrete sense, this meant linking the exploitation of the worker in the factory to women's work at home. As Maria Rosa Dalla Costa and Selma James wrote in their seminal piece in 1972, the woman working at home produced the living human being, the laborer himself. From the 9-month period of gestation in the womb, women's daily chores of cooking, cleaning, washing, ironing clothes, preparing lunch boxes and so on produced the labor power that was daily consumed in the shop or the assembly line and had to be reproduced afresh every day. By providing free services in the home, women made possible the survival of working-class households at subsistence-level wages, with obvious benefits for industry and capital. Despite the links between the housewife and the factory worker, the unwaged status of the former accounted for crucial differences between them. As feminist scholar and writer Silvia Federici wrote, in 1975, in Wages Against Housework, it was possible for wage earners to bargain around the terms of their paid work and the quantity of the wage. But exploited as you might be, you are not that work, she pointed out. Housework, on the other hand, had come to deem the very nature of a woman. This disallowed women from seeing it as real work or as a social contract. And therefore, the women who sought to negotiate housework with their partners were seen as nagging and not as workers in struggle. For the advocates of wages for housework, the wage that the state ought to pay women would make them autonomous of the men on whom they were dependent. More fundamentally, the very demand for a wage was a repudiation of housework as an expression of women's nature. It was a revolt against the assigned social role of women. Therein lay the radical nature of the demand for wages. Not in the money itself. An unresolved issue, there was disagreement among the women ideologues of the second wave on what payment of a wage would actually mean for women. The sociologist, Anne Oakley, who studied the history of housework in her path-breaking books published in the 1970s, was among those who believed that wages for housework would only imprison women further within the household, increase their social isolation and dissuade men from sharing housework. Others too argued that the goal of the women's movement must be, to not ask for wages, but to free women from the daily drudgery of routine domestic chores and enable them to participate fully in all spheres of social life, including paid employment outside the household. The debate around monetary remuneration for housework remained unresolved within the women's movement, even as the tools to measure the value that women's unpaid work adds to national economies have grown more sophisticated. However, the underlying issue, which is the disproportionate share of women's responsibility for the work that sustains human life and reproduces labor power, remains as pressing as ever. A report published by the International Labour Organization in 2018 shows that, globally, women perform 76.2% of total hours of unpaid care work, more than 3 times as much as men. In Asia and the Pacific, this figure rises to 80%. Denning this constituency to return to the MNM's election promise, would the payment of a wage by the state to homemakers redress the situation? This raises the tricky question of how this constituency is to be deemed. Is it to be only women who are full-time homemakers? Many women earning a wage outside the home also perform the bulk of household work. On what ground are they to be excluded? What about women workers who earn an income from home by stitching clothes, selling cooked meals, or are engaged in petty trade? They often self-identify as housewives given the meager and variable wages they earn and periods of seasonal unemployment. These are issues that cannot be easily resolved. It would be better to strengthen the demand for a universal basic income for income-poor households and make sure that the cash transfer to the family reaches women directly, whether or not they combine household work with paid work. Struggle for legislation. However, the demand that the state recognize housework is significant and its radical core must not be missed, as the historical experience of the women's movement shows us. In this context, it is worth mentioning that an important campaign on the question of household labor has been taking place in India. This is the ongoing struggle for national legislation for domestic workers. These are predominantly women who perform women's work but in other people's homes. They are, therefore, uniquely positioned to make this work visible and demand that its conditions be regulated, minimum wages guaranteed, and the workers' status and rights protected. The question of how to measure and account for the value of housework has been seriously addressed by women domestic workers and their trade unions in Tamil Nadu and elsewhere. Their demands include an hourly minimum wage, a weekly DAO, an annual bonus and the protection of their bodily autonomy in the workspace. This is an agenda that all parties, and not just the MNM, could incorporate in their election manifestos, should they take seriously the mandate of recognizing and monetizing housework. If domestic workers emerge as a strong force that succeeds in asserting the dignity of housework and making it a visible and valued form of labor, this can only be a good thing for all women performing housework in the long run. Maximum Governor. Governors should not exceed constitutional duties to serve as agents of the center. The misuse of the governor's oath to undermine duly elected state governments is a particularly mischievous disruption of federalism. Kerala Governor Arif Mohammed Khan's frequent use of his powerful oratory to defend the centre and question the state on sensitive topics makes him partisan and undermines democratic processes. His refusal to convene a special session of the Kerala Assembly on December 23, as initially requested by the government, yet again proved this. He questioned the urgency of the special session, and thought the Assembly lacked the jurisdiction to offer a solution to the farmers' protest, an issue which the Assembly wanted to discuss. This is an encroachment upon the powers of the legislature and the elected government and an abuse of his authority as a nominal head under the Constitution. His conduct was comparable to that of his counterpart in Rajasthan, who refused to convene a session of the Assembly in July last year as demanded by the Chief Minister. Kerala Chief Minister Pinarayi Vijayan wrote to Mr. Khan stating the governor had no discretionary powers in the matter and that his actions were unconstitutional. This position was supported by the opposition too. Thankfully, the government made an amended request for convening the session and the governor accepted it. Mr. Khan had earlier questioned a resolution passed by the Kerala Assembly on the Citizenship Amendment Act, besides making public statements supporting the CAA and the farm laws. To assume that an assembly is acting unconstitutionally if it disagrees with Parliament is disingenuous. By lending himself and his oaths to such partisan conducts, Mr. Khan is also besmirching his personal reputation as a earthly fair-minded public guru. Such conduct by a governor can weaken federalism. In the event, the controversy overshadowed the Onada session on December 31, which sought the repeal of the central laws that are at the heart of the ongoing farmer agitation. A resolution passed with the support of the ruling LDF and the opposition UDF, and unopposed by the lone BJP member, raised procedural and substantive questions related to these laws. The resolution pointed out that agriculture was a state subject and as a matter that seriously irks the states, the bills should have been discussed in a meeting of the Interstate Council. The bills were passed in haste without even referring them to the Standing Committee of the Parliament, which the Assembly termed a serious matter. It has become habitual for the centre to overlook regional concerns, and the making of the farm laws without consulting states was in line with this trend. The Council of States, Rajya Sabha, has been systematically undermined by arbitrarily labeling bills as money bills. The use of central agencies to browbeat opposition-ruled states is yet another strain on federalism.